All right, so I wanted to jump into this topic here. I had a great conversation with Rob Panarello the other day, and Rob's always one to insert a little comedy and lighten things up. And he had a great little story about um, being at a gathering of physicians and talking about science and all that. So I'll let Rob start, and then we'll kind of get into some of the areas of science and technology and research and fake news and all that after that. But Rob, you want to start off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Derek and I, as you said, we're speaking, and I'm a big proponent of science. I'm very much a believer in academics. I just think that, as pendulums swing and come back, et cetera, I place a great value in technology. My concern with speaking to younger physical therapists and younger athletic trainers and younger strength and conditioning coaches is the dependence upon technology and science, though valid. I agree with it to an extent. And I don't know if I wanted everybody's opinion. Is just, are we losing the art of coaching? Are we losing the art of teaching and just becoming so dependent on, the data? And, that's what I think prompted this discussion. So I think everything is a combination of both, valid data or valid science. We know the world isn't flat, though there are people out there that still believe that. We know, we needed science to develop a vaccine. We needed science to develop the arthroscope. We needed science to develop, the components and characteristics of sprinting, et cetera. But we still have to teach and coach it. And are we getting away from that skill set, the combination of art with science? And that's my interest for this discussion today. Others' opinion of that.
Yeah, because it seems we have the scientists, and then we have the people that don't really listen to science. And do we have enough people that are blending the science with the art, in your opinion, Rob? Like, is it and is should that be happening in a school or academic environment, or is it just more everybody's? It's a free for all, and you have to figure it out yourself. You have to, obviously use a bit of science and sprinkle in some experience. Like, who's guiding this?
Yeah, I think in academics it is going to be. I think you should have both, but I think it's going to place an emphasis on the facts, so to speak, the science. And I think you need to have mentors, and you have your experiences with the people that you work with that teach you the art. That's what experience is, right? So, the story that I told Derek that I cracked up when it happened. I was at like a grand rounds, and Derek has attended these with me when he's been in New York, and it's a large auditorium of presentations. And at the time, there were two surgeons, and it was years ago, so I don't remember if it was the time of surgery or a surgical technique that was being utilized. And the surgeon speaking was challenged by one of his peers saying, "Well, nothing you're saying is supported in the literature." And his response was, "Well, I'm not aware of any double-blind studies on parachutes, but we know they work too." And so, there are certain things that that the art we do, through our experiences that we know work, that may not be 100% validated in the research, but the foundation obviously comes from whether science or research or whatever. So again, I just believe everything is a combination of art and science.
Mike Hurst, you've been around the block a few times. Now, what has your interaction been with, say, researchers and sports scientists versus what you found on your own? And how have you kind of navigated through to find out the answer, as opposed to bowing to the scientists and just doing whatever they say? Because I'm sure you have some great stories about that.
Science has many branches. Obviously, you all know, and implementing it is the key thing. And implementing it with if you've got time, science seems to take a long time to work out each individual's profiles and what's right for that person, what's wrong for that person. And as an active coach over the years, I've just learned to do without it. And I'll read as much as I possibly can. I'll talk to smart people like yourself and Dan and whoever can help us. But a lot of the time, you just have to proceed without it. You just have to go forward. Otherwise, you don't get the job done and you're out of the game. And I learned that back in I had a girl that I coached onto the Moscow Olympic team in 1980. And I thought, well, we need a muscle biopsy to guide us. So that's back in 79, 80. And the guy said, I can do it for you, but you already know she's a sprinter. And why would you want to cut this kid up? And I've gone, good point. We don't want to do that. So others obviously have advanced the science on that front, but no, I'm not going to start chopping people up to prove that they can sprint, especially after they've won state titles and qualified for the Olympics in the 100 metres. I know there's a lot more to it, and it could guide a program to say, look, that girl really is better suited to the 200, but does that mean you're going to ignore the 100? No, of course not. So how much is there to be taken? So the study of the area of biomechanics, I think, is the one that has most to contribute. And you can get very much instant feedback, or within a day or so, and it can detect biases, as you know, and energy leakages, which sometimes you don't see. Sometimes you miss it. I'm sure that even Dan misses something. But yesterday we did some testing with Sam Leslie, who's a terrific physiotherapist. He came up from Melbourne to Canberra, and he's using the Plantiga system. Plantiga, do you know what that is? It's Canadian. It's got all sorts of. It's basically measuring devices that are installed in a rubber sole, in an insert. And you sprint, and it tells you a lot of stuff. We haven't seen any of the results yet, but Sam will get back to us. And I just thought, well, that's got a lot of potential. We'll see. We did that on Ian Halpin yesterday. He was keen. So science, I think, it is still in its embryonic as it affects the coaching. I'm sure that the distance runners may benefit more, but from all the oxygen uptake testing and what have you, so that's kind of in the medical science, physiological science. I think it's got a lot of. You just got to keep your eye on what's being developed and how it's dismissed different ideas, like the idea that lactic acid is our friend, not your enemy, and lactic acid is not the villain in the pain process, we are now being told, and it's actually a hydrogen ion. Does that benefit us in any way? I don't think so. Knowing that, how can you use it?
It still hurts. It still freaking hurts, right?
Something still hurts. We haven't figured out how to stop it hurting, So there you go. Science.
So what I'm hearing from Mike is, like, you still got to move forward. And on some level, with or without science. Anybody else want to jump in on that? I know we had a talk. Dean and I had this talk about a specific study on PRP and tendon patellar tendonitis and all that. And one of the first things we do is like, okay, well, what was the procedure? Because somebody was using this study to say PRP doesn't work at all, and dismissed it. And then when you look at the study, Dean, you want to get into this? What were the problems with the study?
Are we allowed to name the study?
You don't have to name the study.
Okay.
We're not here to bash people.
Yeah, I don't want to bash people. Maybe we can provide it up just to see. But yeah, so just speaking from experience and pure, I've been pioneering regenerative rehabilitation for over a decade now, which, for those of you that may not know, it's the combination of orthopedic rehab, physio, chiro, massage, whatever you got, plus orthobiologics, so that is regen rehab. Unfortunately, most of the science, if not all, actually all the science behind this right now is on the regenerative side. So they're doing a ton of studies on stem cells and PRP and various ways to combine these things and so on and so forth. But we just looked at a paper. They had a conference here up at SFU on regen rehabilitation, and the paper was brought up that showed the inefficacy of PRP with patellar tendinopathy. Well, we treat patellar tendinopathy very I mean, we get this fixed basically is what we do. And the problem with this is that my experience all the way through is pushing water uphill with regenerative medicine. So I knew early on that the collagenous anchors, i.e. capsule, tendon, ligament, so on and so forth, when they're not responding to standard physiotherapeutic means through strengthening, conditioning, postural correction, so on and so forth, we've got a big issue. So the study and inherently these studies that we see two fundamentals. One is that they keep saying that we're just not sure about concentration levels of PRP and so on and so forth. It's a big deal to be able to sort this stuff out. In fact, a lot of the science is geared towards this now about understanding, but they use something called the hematocrit levels in the plasma was 15%. Well, RBCs in plasma, our tolerance is 7%. Because red RBCs in the joint space are not good at all. It creates a hell of a lot of problems. So there's things of this nature, but myself being a pioneer in this field, I have had fights with surgeons and insurance adjusters and physicians and, the naysayers all the way through. Yet I was at 6 treatments or 8 treatments of not getting that, I don't care what it is, a cuff or a patellar tendon or whatever, not fixed, if you will. What am I going to turn to? So not only saying that, I mean, my process for the lower kinetic chain dynamic, I mean, I'm dynamometering psoas and glute medius output. I make sure that they're aligned and stable and so on and so forth, making sure every part of that load and the forces are balanced across that lower kinetic chain. Yet I'm seeing all these great results that we're having clinical. I've often said this, I believe in evidence-based practice, Rob, like you say. I mean, we've got to follow the science. I am absolutely adherent to the science. Okay. But as I was telling Derek, when I was a young kid and I went into the 7-Eleven, there used to be the magazine rack was maybe 5 feet wide. There was a Mad magazine, a bunch of Archie comics, a fishing magazine, one on hunting, one on hot rods. And that was it. You go into 7-Eleven, that magazine rack is 20 feet wide and there's 20 magazines on fishing, hunting, every sort of like it's gone so out there. And now my fear is that in this paper, this gentleman decided to refute the efficacy of PRP. Well, his study methodology, with all due respect, was not good. And now we have a paper that was brought up in this symposium where it was being shown, look, guys, PRP doesn't work for patellar tendinopathy.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's one of the things that we've seen with science is that it has to basically narrow down variables which aren't even applicable to real life, right? And maybe Rob, you can touch on this a bit even in your practice, because you have to pull so many papers now to substantiate what you do as a practitioner.
Yeah, I just think that using this example, if you use PRP, and I'm a believer in PRP in certain situations. All right, so the patient has the shot. You're going through the process of healing. How are you taking them through that process? Right? That's what there's an art to that. What are you feeling with their hands? What are you seeing with your eyes? And to me, it's the same thing with coaching. And so, though we have the scientific foundation with regards to validation of what's happening or what works, where's the other side of the equation? How you taking, now that you know that, how you taking the information and how you taking that through an appropriate progression without having setbacks or even having disasters or hurting somebody. And that's my concern, at least in my recent experiences the last few years, with whether it's a younger coach or a younger healthcare professional. I think we're starting to depend, I don't want to say too much on the data, but it's like, I think we're losing. And if I'm wrong, I'm absolutely open to everyone on this Zoomcast's opinion, which is, again, like I said in the beginning, my interest. Are we losing the art of what we do, being, more dictated solely by the science? And I think, at least in the younger people, I think it's starting to happen, and that's a concern.
I just make one quick comment here, and then I'm going to shut it down. I've heard the evidence or evidence-based practice. Well, what about practice-based evidence? Okay, that's what's leading. Innovation is led by evidence-based practice, something that's working clinically that we don't have evidence yet, as with what was my experience. And I had to come forward in that. It is a mighty battle. And I agree with you, Rob. I wonder if, you know, I see it everywhere I go. I see the specifics and such. I mean, Derek and I ran into this very, very much so. The researchers are so laser focused on, they can't see that, with all due respect, I'm generalizing again, but my feeling is they're not seeing the forest for the trees here.
Yeah, Nikki, we're going to pull you into this because you work in a university-based environment, and you had your own private practice. What are some of the things that you're trying to kind of help in your educating young people and saying like, okay, here's the research, but this is what I saw as a practitioner?
Yeah, I still think evidence-based medicine as a movement is still in its infancy, and I think in real terms, it's sort of useless for applied practitioners at this point. But I don't think that'll always be the case. I think at this point, what's coming out is it hasn't matured enough to get to a point where people understand what the roles are. So I agree with the part about, I think for me as a applied science, I think biomechanics is the most useful and the most interesting. And I do agree that there's things that you just can't see with the naked eye that necessitate a more in-depth analysis, assuming that you're working with somebody who's elite and you've already picked off all the low-hanging fruit. And I think in that aspect, those guys need to just keep doing what they're doing. So I think they know very specifically what their role is and what their job is, and I don't think they're trying to transcend different roles. I think the difficulty is that people become sort of hamstrung by the idea that somebody's going to say they're doing something wrong. And what I'm finding is I'm now almost 2 years into academia. We're still sort of semi-applied, but at least in the I don't know if I want to call them manual therapies, but let's say PT, DC, AT, our exposure in the university to real life cases and situations where you have to make real time decisions that have consequences it's very low. It's not like medicine where you go and do a residency and you get the opportunity to participate in potentially life-saving surgeries or a year's worth of applied work. We don't really have that. We just jump straight from school into private practice, and then you're sort of stuck with, maybe not everybody ends up in a professional physical therapy type environment, like most people don't. They'll end up in a smaller practice, and then they're sort of stuck with whatever the philosophy or the outlook of the clinic owner is, or indeed the hospital group if they go to work for I'll just say Andrews Institute as an example. That's not a knock on them at all. I'm sure it's a very good place to work, but just because there's one down the road. And they're just nobody has bridged that gap with them. And then also now teaching on this human performance program, the understanding of let's say the lay practitioner, so somebody who's hasn't had exposure to a performance environment, is the problem is they think they know, but they don't really know. So if you put something like a topic on wearables, so let's say we do go down the road of Whoop or consumer level wearables, people can't make the distinction between something which is scientifically valid and then the stuff you get on the other side. And they get so hung up. I've been reading this book lately. I think it's something bullshit. I can't remember what it is, but it basically dives into the art of examining science and studies and how to refute bullshit which comes from. And his point is that you don't have to understand what the algorithms is, but if you can recognize crappy information in and crappy information coming out, be the type of cohort, or if the people that you're looking at are actually applicable to the group you're interested in, then you can make reasonable extrapolations. But people aren't even doing that. So it's a strange place to. I actually think it'll sort of come out in the wash. Maybe what will end up happening is people understand a bit more directly what their roles are and where the shortcomings are. But the other part, anecdotally, that I'm finding is that for sports science types, the GPS guys and stuff, I just don't think they communicate their role very well. Because when you hear feedback from players and athletes, when you speak to them, the sports scientist is they're just doing loads and they're trying to stop me training and they're trying to pull me from games and stuff. If that's what players are telling you that they think is their role, then I just feel like those people aren't explaining very well what they're there to do. So those are some of the issues I've seen. I think a lot of it is communication and this sort of confusion at the moment between we're supposed to be doing what the role of the literature is and this delineation between all these different subspecialties, which ones are useful, which ones aren't. I mean, maybe that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, some good points there, Nikki. Just in terms of, you know, getting your work done, getting results, and then, you know, well, is the science actually showing that I'm doing the right thing, even though I'm still getting results? Like, I think sometimes there's some insecurity around that. How about the coaches out there, Ryan and Rob? We'll get you guys talking a bit, but you know, how does science guide you, or do you just have a thought in your head and you're like, I'm going to do this, and you make sure that you kind of vet the science a bit too, and you don't stray too far away from it? How does what's your working process, Ryan?
Well, I think it's like when you go to a clinic, there are things that are reaffirming, and then there are things that make you curious. And so I kind of use sports science in that regard. There are things I already do in my training that maybe I have a bias towards, and then science kind of proves that maybe I'm right or maybe I'm wrong. And then the other aspect of it is, ooh, that's very intriguing. How can I apply that, implement that into my program? And, you know, we had an interesting experience. My wife and I, we were having a hard time getting pregnant the old fashioned way. We had to do a bunch of medical interventions with my wife. And we visited two of the top doctors in our area for fertility medicine. And the one doctor was showing us data from 1990s. Okay. And the percentages weren't good. And the data wasn't very good. And it wasn't very promising. Then I went to a doctor, and I'll name him because he's the one that actually took care of us, and we have two beautiful children because of him, Dr. Odom. He was showing us data from the day before, and he worked in a research medical university, Washington University. So he was on the bleeding edge of all these options and all of these interventions, and he had up-to-date data. But he was also way down the rabbit hole in terms of mastering all of the unique opportunities that the science, the medicine, and the research could be used to leverage, you know, fertility for our family. And so when I look at it in sports, I'm like, okay, what do I know works? What do I have questions about? What am I curious about? What am I concerned about? That's my daughter. She just caught me talking down here.
Thank you, Dr.
And
Odom.
yeah, Dr. Odom, exactly. And so then I'm like, all right. So for example, thing for me, flexibility, right? Suppleness. Everybody poo-poos static stretching as a modality for suppleness. Well, you come to find out when you look at how they did the research, they're holding the stretch for 90 seconds, 60 seconds. They're not following it up with any sports related activities to build or crescendo the body into whatever performance activity you're going to do. They limit things because the nature of the scientific method, you can only attack one variable at a time, which can be very frustratingly slow for us who are performance coaches when we're trying to figure out what's going on. Well, sure enough, you go down farther down the research, they find out when you hold the stretch for 15 seconds, you get the benefit, but you don't get as much of the negative. Then you find out with other research, if you follow it up with low amplitude bounding, plyometrics, biomechanic drills, the neurological system kind of resets itself, and the athlete still has the longer benefit of the suppleness, but doesn't lose out on the neurological squeeze, if you will, of high performance that's necessary for, you know, traction and elevation. And so things like that are things that I'm interested in because, again, it confirms what I believe, even though science has been telling me something different for a while. And then in other ways, like the work that Ken Clark has done, you know, like heavy sled work. Well, great. It improves the first 10 to 20 meters of your sprint, but have they looked at 60, 70, 80, 90, 100? And then the other problem is with high performance, we have very few athletes that are in that sphere that would ever want to be experimented on. Just like, you know, Coach Hurst talked about, who wants to get a biopsy when they're one of the most elite athletes in an Olympic year? No one. No coach wants interruptions. No coach wants any interference in their training. And they are not willing to use their most elite athletes as guinea pigs to figure out the validity or efficacy of this research and data, you know, for the betterment of the rest of the athletic community. And so I think those are the challenges that we run into. Now, thankfully, They have done some great work recently with that company Athletogen and other companies when it comes to DNA profiling and starting to narrow down, hey, if you have this genetic makeup and you have these genes, you might be in this sphere, you might be successful at this. And that's great. But I had, the genes that said I wasn't going to be bald. So then you still have questions, on how that plays out in terms of genetic expression versus genetic reality. So there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of really cool stuff. And as science gets better, when it comes to sports performance, we're going to get better. But we have to use what I call our mother wit and our intuition to kind of figure out how we can apply this stuff, and then figure out, well, that research wasn't built in a way that even is something that we would do in practice, or it's great to maybe do some PAP work, but how am I going to do PAP work when I have only 20 meters under a gym before I get called out to the stadium to go sprint and not hit somebody in the head when I'm throwing a heavy med ball around to stimulate my nervous system? And what if somebody false starts? Do I miss the window of opportunity? So you've got to figure out what's practical as well, not only what's valuable.
Thank
Ryan,
you.
sorry, what was that? You said mother what? You use your mother what?
Wit. So like your intuition, your gut feeling, your gut reactions, things you've seen through your observation, through your coaching eye, things that work, but you haven't had a sports scientist tell you that the parachute saves people, but it does. That type of stuff.
All right. Adrian, you were talking a bit about, this conflict between coaching method and scientific method, and there's some problems with that. What has been your experience?
Well, I've got it high school, college, and pro. Like, for example, the sports science, and I'll be the first one to say it. Everyone here is obviously smarter than me. Like using, say, I'm gonna just use Rob, for example. Okay, Rob will come, and again, I mean nothing by Rob. Say I'm training someone that are working with the team, and Rob was like, well, my book says 25% of this does this. And if you stretch them this way, da 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 da. And in my head, I'm thinking, shut the F up. So in my head. So, but and again, it's like Sam and I talk about it all the time. We try to find that happy medium between the sports science and with experience. I mean, experience says this, sports science says this. It's like the whole analytic, in NFL analytics. My roommate, he laughs at me because like, oh, analytics says you should go for it on 4th and 3. Shut the F up. You're in the 5-yard line. Just get the field goal and get the points and get out of there. Screw your analytics. Now, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a logical thinker as opposed to the science. And I mean, that's just the way I look at it, because like I said, the smart guys, they're like, oh, do this. But my problem is with most of the smart guys, you've never even seen a field past junior high school. So how are you going to tell me how it's going to work? I mean, you understand what I mean?
Yeah, that's why there's no research papers on dating, right?
So Adrian, in your opinion, why are we getting away from that? That's my question. Why are we getting away? So to go back to what Ryan said, right? He talked about static stretching. All right. So we know in rehab, we use static stretching, low load, prolonged duration to achieve motion, right? So let's say you don't have the motion to perform the task. We may use static stretching to achieve the motion so that you correlate to what you need to perform the task, and then maybe get away from that and do more dynamic things in your warm up, so to speak. But that's just taking data from different studies and applying it to what you see in coaching, right? Like you said, this is what the analytics are. Screw it, kick the field goal. Why do you think we're getting away from that? Why do you think we're depending more on the analytics instead of, for lack of a better term, common sense? Why do you think that's happening?
That's a very good question, sir. I really wish I knew. I have the devil angel thing always going on in my shoulders every time someone asks me a question. The devil's like, you're a bunch of freaking idiots. The angel side says, well, maybe science has a part to do with it. So again, trying to, I guess you could say, marry the two, trying the most common denominator. But again, I really wish I could understand that. But like just someone just put on there, tell that to Pete Carroll. Yeah, Marshawn Lynch is still pissed by that, by the way. Just saying.
Yeah. Rob, could I a quick answer for that?
Yeah, sure.
My opinion is plain and simple: fear. people are so fearful of being judged and being wrong, right? And then what are we watching now? Accountability's out the window because it wasn't me. It wasn't I that, but I tell my daughters all the time, mistakes are not to be frowned upon. They're actually beautiful moments to learn from. Make as my daughter, took her skiing. Daddy, I didn't fall once today. I said, you weren't skiing hard enough, right? I really honestly believe that's that I see that all the time, including in myself at times where fear is guiding it. I don't want to, sometimes you're scared to push things in groups. And the next thing you know, you're not pushing the envelope there. Just an opinion.
Good opinion. Good opinion. Rob Basile, what are your thoughts on this in terms of your coaching and what's guiding you? And when do you just put your head down and say, look, I'm just doing this. I know what works. And when do you kind of take a look at some research and go, well, I may change some things?
Right. I mean, Ryan said a lot. I think everything we do is has to be based on science, right? But the challenge at the college level is you have science and technology that's trying to guide us, but there are a lot of other challenges that we have: budgets, staffing. You're dealing with athletes that really have limited training history. So, for example, I had a men's soccer coach. He wants us to buy, invest in heart rate monitoring, right? And spend tens of thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, the simple thing is these kids don't train enough. I don't need to know what their heart rate is. They need to lift more. They need to run more consistently. So to invest in that kind of money, I think is not prudent. That being said, we did do that. And over the summertime, I was using the information to kind of track our athletes, and I had the time, but during the year, I don't have the time. I'm not a data analytics guy. I'm not, although my degree's in exercise physiology, I'm not an exercise physiologist. I don't have time to kind of, go through all this data. I have to be on the floor and coach. And, although the information is important, a lot of times you just don't have the time, you don't have the resources, you don't have the space. You have athletes that, like I said, have no training history. So you're trying to teach them things that are basic, as i.e. doing a push-up. You have a Division I athlete, they're a Division I soccer player. They're not necessarily a Division I athlete. And I'm not saying to do a push-up means you're an athlete or not, but those are the little things that you have to teach. I don't need to spend $100,000 on a GPS system. I need to just do basics, basic plyometric work, basic lift strength training, basic conditioning. That's all I need. But I think, getting back to what Rob said, this is just society. We're, a cell phone, internet-based, want it now information society, and you're kind of trapped by it, and that's the way it's going to go. And our athletes, they want their individualized programming. They want to have their phone, they want to have their information on their phone. And as a college strength coach, I'm not there to individualize every athlete. I have 300 athletes. So they're able to go to their personal trainer and get everything individualized, where I can't necessarily do that. Or I'm not a professional sports team that could drop $100,000, and if they don't use it, they don't use it. Right. Or they have a sports scientist that's dedicated to analyzing the information, that could disseminate that information to the strength coach, to the exercise physiologist, to the ATC or physio, whoever. I don't have that luxury, so, yes, I use science. Yes, I use technology, but at the end of the day, I think the basics is what guides me.
Yeah. So you're mastering the art of knowing when to access that science and when to dedicate that money and time to it. It
Right.
sounds like, yeah.
Right. And
And
you
that,
also have to deal with coaches, where, they want to train all the time. And I'm not going to name the team or the coach, but, I said, hey, we're training 3 days a week. We're doing a tier-based system. I said, we've gotten the same results out of doing 3 days compared to 4 or 5 days. Right. And I said, now you're allowing these athletes to rest and recover, which is actually going to make them better. It's not the act of training, it's the recovery process that is getting you better, correct? They don't want to hear it. They want their athletes training 24/7. They want, so you have to bow down to it. At the college level, you have to give in and say, okay, I'll give you what you want. I had the conversation with this coach and I said, are we giving our athletes what they want or what they need? A 20-year-old male athlete, he wants to lift weights. He wants to lift heavy weights. He's not thinking about the fact that he's a baseball player or a lacrosse player, and he doesn't need to be squatting 500 pounds. And that down the road, he's going to have orthopedic issues. They don't want to hear that. They want to look good. My favorite time for our baseball team is at the end of the workout when I run on the board big arms. So they could do their bis and tris. They roll their sleeves up, and that's their favorite time, which I understand because they're 20, and we all did the same thing. But those are the challenges that the science says maybe one thing and experience says another. But at the end of the day, we answer to obviously the athlete and the coaches. And we have to give them what they want to a degree, unless it's going to be obviously harmful. And then you have to put your foot down, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Good points.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too is with the data that you get from all of that stuff, whether you're tracking heart rate, you're tracking GPS, like it's great. If you're even tracking rate of perceived effort, RPE, like you want to be careful with how you respond to that data initially. And I would think that collect the data first, like for a year before you start responding, and then go back and look at what were the outcomes of those moments. Did we have injuries? No. Okay, that's good. So maybe the training, that we did, at least wasn't going to be a detrimental thing later. What I'm always fearful of is like if athletes, like let's say for rate of perceived effort or heart rate, all of a sudden a number jumps up and we would perceive that number jumping up as being a negative. And then a week and a half later, they run a massive PR or break a school record or they achieve elite status. And so my thing, when I get concerned about that, is that we allow the numbers, the machinery, and the tech to give us the out to not do the necessary work that needs to be done in training for these athletes to be successful. And to go back with what Dean said, definitely the reason why we lean on this stuff is that we want the excuse, we want the out, and a little bit of a shield to say, well, this is what the numbers say, this is what the analytics say, this is what the data says. Like basketball, we had a conversation, Derek, on here, a zoomPOP, about load management. And we still, how did that help, Kawhi beat the Lakers? Well, it didn't, and you look at the highest average number of minutes in NBA basketball, and all of those guys that are in the top 10 are in the Hall of Fame. So my thing is, as opposed to reducing minutes, how do we get the athletes to be rock solid like those guys in the past, like Jordan, who's a physical freak, but also worked really hard, or Reggie Miller, who looked like he couldn't take his sister in a fist fight, yet played all the time and is a Hall of Fame basketball player. So what was it about what they did, how they moved, how they worked that allowed them to be so successful? And I think that that's what we need to do when we're looking at that data, looking at that research, and narrowing it down to like the day. When you're competing, when you talk to an athlete and they make a mistake once, that might be good because it's a learning opportunity. But if they only make it once and you cue them, you try to correct them, you change your strategy, and you could be chasing a one-off error or a one-off mistake that won't show itself again. But now you're down this cascade of many mistakes because you're making all of these interventions that could have just been a one and done anomaly in the world of sport or in that particular activity. So I think it's really important to gather data, then to look at it, discuss it, think about its flaws, and then look back and go, well, what happened, 1 day out, 2 days out, a week, month, whatever. And I think that's where we can really get a benefit from all of that.
Yeah, Mike, I wanted you to jump back on. I know you have to go to a workout.
Thanks. So in a nutshell, I would say that there's too much respect being given to academics in the science fields. He's got a doctorate. That's the word of God. Slight exaggeration. And you need to interpret what you see with your own eyes and not always rely on somebody else's endorsement of your view. And as an experienced coach, you have a pretty good idea of what works and maybe what won't. I go back to 1985 to the World Cup of Athletics in Canberra, and the East Germans were at their peak. I had finished the Australian Track and Field Coaches Association course, like an advanced coaching course where you live in for a week at the AIS. And we were told that ballistic stretching was an absolute no-no at any point. You do not do that, you will tear. And then we're watching the East Germans warm up, Marita Koch and Marlies Gurr. They're bouncing all over the fucking place. And I'm thinking, how can I reconcile that with what I was just taught a few months ago? And I integrated all those kind of crazy discrepancies and disparities into when I had that problem a year later, and with one of my athletes who had a massive failure of adaptation following a traditional pyramid style program theory, and I redesigned the whole thing through all of everything I'd learned. I put off to one side and said, this is what I've learned, and this is what I believe. I've confirmed this. This is what I've been taught, and I seriously question the validity of it. So I rewrote the whole book, produced 2 Olympic finalists and national record breakers a year later. I thought, yeah, that's what you got to do. You got to think for yourself, and stop just believing every damn thing that's written and preached, because there's an agenda behind most of it. And it may well be financial, or it's just someone on an ego trip, or they genuinely believe what they have been taught by their superiors. So you get in a situation where I had this guy, lovely guy, Jack Collett, who was, lost the national 400 meter title by a shoe length 3 years ago. And a little bit after that, had a massive lateral tear in a hamstring tendon. And it knocked us around a lot. We used PRP, thanks to the Wallabies doctor, Nathan Gibbs, a champion guy, a champion doctor. And he did it for free for the young athlete who was penniless then. And he said, in 6 weeks, you can be back jogging, but you're not going to be able to compete for a while because you've got to strengthen that up. It's brand new tissue, basically, and the connections have to be. So, like about a year later, we go to I won't say where, but we went to a very senior physiotherapist on the national scene who is a lovely guy. And he puts Jack onto this kind of bench, and he's working the glute ham mechanism, posterior chain, all connected up to a dynamometer. And he says, I'll bet there's a weakness there. It's always the case. There's a weakness in that hamstring glute mechanism. The kid was about, how much would he have weighed? 75 kilos, 77 maybe max. He's pulling single leg. He's pulling a ton on each leg. And the guy says, this is the strongest result we've almost ever recorded here. But he needs to be stronger. Well, come on, man. You just said it's the strongest damn result you've ever seen, and he's a flyweight. So kind of look at the results and reinterpret that for me, because that cannot be the whole story there. Maybe the testing was wrong, or the interpretation of the test results was wrong. And that's the biggest issues in sports science. Have the tests been conducted properly? Have the interpretations been sensible and accurate? And if not, how far have we progressed with the help of sports science? A little bit here and there. And I think we've got to keep up to date with everything that's coming out and do our best to sort of catch up with anything that's really useful. And honestly, I haven't seen that much that's been really, really useful outside of biomechanics, which has seriously helped therapy, our therapists. That's all I have to say.
Well, it sounds like there's no easy answers, Mike. Like, it's just we still have to keep filtering all this information. We got to think for ourselves, and we got to work hard and put in the time and effort. And if you're not willing to do that, shaking research papers at people aren't going to solve your problems. Nikki, did you want to say something, or are you just fooling around with the new hand function that you figured out?
Well, both actually. I thought that was a perfect practical example of the discussions. I didn't know how to do it. Dean spent a year screwing around, finally got it sorted out, and then he told me, and I've done it successfully. So it was two parts. The second part, just relating to some of the stuff in the chat about academic pursuits, PhDs and certs and further CEUs. If the cert, for me, if a cert specifically fills a hole in your knowledge base, and it's practically, for example, a running mechanics professional level 2 out soon online. There's a obvious place for that, and likewise, like I recently finished my master's in clinical neuroscience. But people ask me, well, was it worth it? Is it worth having a piece of paper? It's like, no, I'm not making more money. I'm not seeing more clients. In fact, I'm probably making less money because I didn't get a pay raise. So with inflation and stuff, screwed. Maybe if I'm still at university in 2 years, I can say, oh, can I now get my whatever it is, associate professorship or full? But the fact was, I learned so much going through the process, because I was able to, I at least had a focus for the stuff I did want to learn about. It was useful, but the piece of paper itself, be it a PhD or a master's, is for me is worthless, really. And then the reason I originally put my hand up was because I was just sort of thinking of people. If you take a strength coach that's been good at any level, if for some reason they stop working in the sports or professional sports arena, they have transferable skills that they could go and start their own business. There would be demand for their services in the private sector. And I think if we're thinking about a sports scientist who's working niche, we're talking about sports science replacing possibly S&C coach, I don't think the demand for somebody applying sports science in the private sector is there. So I just think fundamentally, from a practical standpoint, they're not there yet, is what I see. I can think of maybe one guy who worked for, I think he worked for Vald, or one of these companies that's now working as a strength coach or a personal trainer at a private facility, but he's just in there working with other personal trainers. The sports science part of it is being largely irrelevant for him. So it's strange to me that it has such a high profile only in that environment. But if you remove it from that elite environment, it really doesn't have a purpose, which I think you could probably not say for probably anybody else in this call. There's transferable skills where you could work across different domains and be reasonably successful. Like, for example, your background was S&C, but you've been able to work in rehab. You've been able to successfully work with really complex cases in Dean's clinic. There's a level of understanding when you've worked with people and seen stuff.
Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts on that, Rob?
No, I was just thinking, for what Nikki was saying, like, the Chiefs don't use GPS, and they've been real successful the last few years. And I'm sure there are other teams that do use GPS and other things and have been very successful as well. Again, I go back, I'm just, listening to what Mike Hurst said, I'm just, instead of taking the information as valued information and we dictate how to use it, I'm just wondering if people are letting the data dictate to them, which is a big difference, and that's what I think is happening. Because when the data just dictates to what you do, again, I just think the art of what we do and the ability to teach I think it starts to demise. It starts to, it starts to go, so to speak. And if you've never had someone teach you the art, or be with a great mentor, then that's all that's out there. Whether it's the internet or research papers, whatever it may be. All you're doing is just taking in data. But I think it's imperative that, okay, I've got all this data. How do I use it? And I go back to the PRP injection. We know it works in various scenarios. Okay, the shot was given. Now I have this athlete. What's my progression after this shot to get them back? Right? All the data shows you that the shot works, but what's the progression of training to get them back? So I don't know.
Yeah, it would be no different than a surgical procedure. Obviously has to be robust, but if you don't manage it after that surgery, you could obviously disrupt it. Is there anything? Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm saying with the GPS, and I'm pleased. I'm not knocking GPS, but a lot of bad things happen when someone gets excessively fatigued. Right? That's why we have a pitch count. Force production, biomechanics change, etc. I got that. But if you're going to shut everybody down when they start to get tired, what happens when you go to compete in Denver at high altitude? What happens when the game goes into overtime? What happens? Like, I think Ryan said it before. You had pitchers years ago, and I'm not saying I'm an advocate of it so much, but we've made pitching 9-inning games extinct with all the specialists. Middle reliever. The basketball players, that played. Michael Jordan, he played 2 full seasons interrupted by an Olympics. He didn't get any rest, those 12 months. And, he went back to back. What if you shut him down because he'd be too tired? So, I don't know. I think it's a balance of taking what's presented to you and knowing how to use it, and not just letting it be the bottom line, so to speak. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I'm looking at it, and that's my concern.
Well, the funny
You're
thing,
right. The interpretation.
yeah, the funny thing with the GPS is that I was really good. Like back in the old days, I was a guy who held the map and said, "Okay, we're going here." The paper map, and we never got lost. But using GPS, we've gotten lost a whole bunch of times because it just messed up. It just didn't, whatever. It just didn't guide us the right way. So I think there's some similarities here where if you rely on that type of technology and somebody else to tell you what to do, you're probably going to get lost rather than thinking for yourself. So, Clint, I wanted you to jump in. Where are you right now?
Yeah, still in China. I'm in Beijing.
All right. How's that going for you?
It's good. It's been quite a journey for sure. Yeah, I've been here since August 2019.
Yeah, because the last time we saw you, we thought you got jumped because you were talking on zoomPOP.
That was pretty interesting. Yeah, so we'll try and keep it clean here. I'll keep my connection.
Anything you have to say about what you're doing there and how things are done there in terms of like science and practice and.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting to hear everyone talk. First of all, it's really interesting to hear everyone's different perspectives and just so much good information. So I always use this as chance to really catch up and hear some good intelligent conversation. So, but definitely I think maybe on 2 or 3 different points. I think certainly like we've talked about experience versus science and practice versus application and the amount of knowledge that's out there. The amount of knowledge has grown so much and there's so much information and what one person interprets as science might be different than other information that still has been published. So, and I think a lot of it probably depends what kind of field we're working in. If we're in orthopedics, if we're in coaching, certainly some of these treatments sound extremely scientific. So, on the coaching side, it might be a little bit different. So, I hear some of the young coaches here. We have a lot of young coaches from around the world and they'll talk about, certain things that are being published and different kind of topics like that. And they're so far ahead in terms of their scientific knowledge. But again, when it comes back to the practice and the application, I think maybe maybe a little bit different information there. And then next, with some of the teams here, they spend a lot of money on technology, and then it becomes a matter of, well, when do we get to actually implement some of this stuff? And so I think with the coaching and the practical experience, I think it's interesting to hear some of the guys coaching in different backgrounds and different arenas, because you get to implement, it seems like guys get to implement some of their practice. And in my experience, it's the hardest thing is actually being able to have any type of freedom coaching whatsoever. So I think I've found that in hockey, and then also here as well. You could have all the knowledge in the world and have all the great training programs and experience coaching, but when are you going to get into that environment where you're actually able to have some freedom to work with your athletes? And that's a big issue here that the teams have had, and it'll be interesting to see their results if the Olympics go forward in Tokyo and in Beijing next year. And I'm as interested as anyone to see how some of the teams perform and how the country here does in general with their medal count, because there's a huge difference team to team in terms of application, and the training methods very traditional. So they'll spend a ton of money on all the technology, and then and then they're still training. I was with one of the hockey the national team here, and they were training. I think I mapped it out to almost 60 or 70 hours a week they were training. So I would try and talk to them and say, like, this is not how you do it, and that I'll tell you that my input was not received well. So it's like, so where do you kind of meet the middle between the knowledge that's available, the practice, and where do you kind of blend all this through? And I think that's a lot what we talk about with the art of coaching. And so it's interesting to hear everyone talk about their different experiences in their different arenas, and to hear it all blend together.
Well, that's interesting how I mean, there's obvious cultural differences too. Like, I'm sure when you say you guys are working too hard, they just point you like, look at the Great Wall. How do you think we got that done?
Exactly. Yeah.
But have you found that that's more difficult, like, because you're not from there, like that they won't necessarily respect regardless if you have science and numbers, like you're just that white guy.
Yeah, you are, for sure. And it's really interesting to ask that, because they'll hire the foreign coaches to come in, and they really respect your expertise, and the amount of respect I get here compared to home is night and day. Here you're truly seen as an expert. They will not question your expertise, and they'll really show the respect that way, and they want your input, but without saying anything. It is cultural though, but then it won't be listened to anyways. So, like they want the input, they want you there, but they won't listen to it. And, it's not to say anything's better or worse, because back home, no one even cares about your input, at least in my experience, some of the hockey teams. I mean, I guess it depends where you're working. If you've got an NHL team at your disposal and you've got a good coaching group, and maybe you've been in some circumstances like that where people want to push the limit and they're willing to work together and collaborate, but here at least you're respected as an expert. But back home, no one even wants to hear what you have to say. And even getting in at a local, like a provincial level junior A team, they're not impressed. So what, you have these degrees and you have this coaching experience, like, what do you know? It doesn't mean anything. Like, I'm a hockey guy, I know what's going on. And so I see both sides of the coin. So yeah, definitely. To answer your question, like they do bring us over, they respect our expertise, but culturally they have their tradition of hard work, and it's got to be done. You've got to train 6 hours a day, and I think they actually limited the amount of time that the athletes were allowed to work out per day, and I think they cut it down to about 4 to 6 hours for some of the teams, and they felt like that was, like they want those 4 to 6 hours with some of the national teams. So every day. Even on game days, we were with the national. I was with the national team this year, and game days, working out game days, doing testing the day before our season opener. They're doing testing and full workouts. I swear we did a 3-hour training session the morning of our first game.
Wow. Anybody have any thoughts on that? How do we compete against that? Obviously, you haven't seen the Toronto Maple Leafs play lately.
Yeah, they're looking pretty good there.
Anybody else have any comments before we wrap up on this? And have, it seems like in summary, there probably is some sort of lip service to technology and science, but a lot of people just do what they do, and some do it well and some not so well. Rob Panarello?
No, I mean, I've said just about. I just be repeating myself, which my wife says is my worst fault. But again, I just my concern is the ability for the future, whether they're a healthcare professional or strength and conditioning coach, to achieve the expertise of, okay, here's the data, how do I use it, what's best for my clientele or my athlete, versus it 100% dictating and handcuffing me in what I do, and my concern is that's going that way. But as I've learned in my career, the pendulum always swings back. It goes one way and it seems to come back. So I'm sure that in the future things will continue to change. That's the way it's always been. That's the way it always will be. So we'll see.
Well, it's interesting, and maybe Ryan can jump in as we close up here. A couple others, but certainly some technology has been leaning towards getting people to do less, like as Clint has said. But is there a problem that the pendulum swings too far, Ryan? That maybe we're not doing enough in some cases because technology is holding us back, or the prevailing wisdom is to not static stretch as part of warm up, or do you think there's some problems there where people are using some information to get out of doing things?
Yeah, I would say cherry picking of information is going to be a problem forever. I mean, there's an argument right now whether acceleration or maximum velocity training is the most important thing to do. And I'm thinking to myself, well, how the hell do you do maximum velocity training if it's better without accelerating? Are we just going to throw you down on a high speed treadmill and good luck, you're going to road runner it, or Wile E. Coyote it? And that's the only way that we get this done. That just seems dumb, foolish, and sophomoric. And so for me, it's like, well, maybe the data shows that is a small percentage, but is that even a significant? And then you get into the conversation of what's statistically significant in science versus what's statistically significant in actual reality of performance. And what needs to happen, to summarize all of this, is you need to have coaches that respect it and have it be part of their weekly huddle with their staff on how we can be better because of this information, be better because of this data, or drive the ship and say, all right, I understand that that's what is saying right now, but I feel in my gut that I want to take this one more week. And Clint talked about in China working extraordinarily hard and doing all that work. But if you read the book Friday Night Lights, the actual book, not the bad TV series or the okay movie, they had to make a rule saying in Texas that you can't practice in the summer more than 8 hours a day, because there are some coaches that want to go in that route. And then the opposite problem, as you mentioned on the pendulum, is true. You get to these extremists that say, I feel really comfortable with my practice being 3 times 10 and going home, and that's all we do. We don't warm up. We don't really cool down. We don't stretch. We just do that, and then we race. And then my football guys will sometimes lift because I kind of have to let them lift if they're going to be a part of my team, and that's all I do. Well, then at that end of things, well, then what is your intervention as a coach? How are you managing it? And that's the whole idea as a coach, is we want to manage all of these things. You should have your staff. You should have your Justice League of therapists. You should have your scientists that advise you. That's how things get done. That's how excellence happens, is by balancing all of these important people to help you make these decisions. But ultimately, you're the one who makes the decisions. And then you have to have a darn good reason for making those choices based off of what hopefully is wisdom gained over a number of years through experience that's been helped by scientists, by therapists, by your strength coach, by a sports psychologist. But ultimately, you as the coach should be pretty good at all those things as well. Don't be just a one-trick pony, and then you'll have some greatness.
Mike Hurst, sorry. Before you go off to train some young athletes and deny the scientists, and just do it on your experience alone, what do you have to say to us to leave us for this weekend?
Interpretation and application is pretty much the whole box and dice, I think.
Oh,
that's all.
That's great. That's awesome. Thank you very much, everyone. Great talk. enjoyed everybody's contribution, and Confucius like Mike. Thank you very much, and we'll join you guys again soon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'm going to go shovel some snow now. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Derek.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks again, guys.
Take care.
Rob.
Thanks.